Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
Sorry I'm a bit late.
It's okay.
Whew.
I was just
How are
testing.
you?
Oh, all right. Yeah. All right. I was just testing out the room. There's like a new moderator function, so I was testing it out.
Ooh. What does it do?
Oh, it just lets me let people in. Like it's kind of like Google Hangouts. So it lets you let people in the room, in case people come in who want to do harm to the room or whatever. So I see. Well, I guess we have our agenda, but we don't have to stick to it so closely today. We have so your template here that you propose is introductions, news, old business, and new business, and then closing.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Like, I've been between that and I updated the what was the task board to have it more like the meeting layout of the task board. So because I know I have the habits of like old business and new business and like news as part of like those categories, but I'm not quite sure the best order for them. So I mean, there's plenty of room for adjustment, and like I'm not trying to impose too much structure here. That like, oh, we have to do it this way because I don't, I think you know that, but just to kind of just say that, and also just say like, there's stuff, there's just to think about what should be. Just some of the things missed and sort of what we regularly keep track of. And like,
Hello.
Yeah, here it is. Hi, how are you?
You okay?
Good.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Like I will in a few moments, in like a minute or two, when I'm fully set and on camera, I'll go through the board stuff. But if you want to do like introductions or news, or like also just a meeting recap of what happened last week, that was sort of a nice thing to have too. But those, that can be sort of, those are all things I think would be good to start off the meeting with.
Yeah. Yeah. So why don't Anson, do you have any news for this week? Or anything
I
happened
have
last week?
Thanksgiving break this week, so I might make some good progress on the research project I was doing. Besides that, nothing major right now.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, look forward to seeing your stuff from if you get to your paper this week.
Yep.
So that's good. Thanks for that update. Why don't I go over what we did last week, just quickly to recap. So last week, actually, what I've done here, I've done some new feature here where I have, let me share my screen. This new feature is on the, I can't remember if this is it. Okay, this is in the new orthogonal lab the organization. And so if you go to the front page of the organization, you see the Saturday Morning NeuroSim repository. And if you go in there, you'll see that I have things listed by week here. November 14th, November 21. And a README that says repositories and topics related to the Saturday Morning NeuroSim topical meeting. November 2020, 1421. Now, last week was November 14th, so I click on the 14. And this is what we have for each week now. A stub where we have the meeting recording. So we have the link to the YouTube presentation. We also have a Twitter thread, which happens every week. So this is the link to the Twitter thread. And usually what I'll do is I'll post a link to the meeting and then some associated readings. And then in the final tweet, I'll tag everyone who was at the meeting. And maybe some people couldn't make the meeting, but who might be interested in the readings. So if we have like, if we have some topic that was interesting to someone who couldn't make the meeting, I'll CC them on it. And so that's always good to look at, even if you're not on Twitter, just to see how sort of the progression of the meeting went and some of the supplementary readings. So I didn't replicate the Twitter thread on GitHub, but there's a direct link to it. Then if we have a presentation, that's useful here. So we have the presentation, Introduction to Animats. So we have a link to that presentation, and I think people were happy about that presentation. I know Jesse congratulated me on it, and I think Anson found it useful. And then the supplemental notes, which are down here, and I don't know if we have. This is where we can add. I think everyone was in the meeting can add things, or maybe there can be a discussion about things. So this is an area for people to, contribute. They can commit something of their own in here. Just make it as a point. So if you go to the edit function here, you'll see it's just in text. You just put it down as a separate line like this. And I think there were some notes in Slack that people made, and that would be good to put in the supplemental notes. So like links to things that are, that you might think that are related to last week's meeting that I didn't put in the Twitter thread, for example. Or, if you have ideas for some future presentation. So that's how I think we'll recap the meetings. We'll just I'll try to put these up after the meeting, like quick hits of what happened during the meeting, and then we'll have it in these repositories so we can actually go back to earlier meetings and look and check and see what we were doing. Because it's like you have to wade, otherwise you have to wade through the recording, and it's hard to get things out. So this is the meeting notes for November 21. It's all ready to go. I have the template here. We'll fill these in as they come out. And I encourage people, again, to use the supplemental notes if you're, if it's something that you think that would be useful to people who are interested in that week. So, yeah. So that's all I wanted to say about that.
I actually really like that idea. I think it's a great idea, and I know there was some of the Twitter Fusion stuff that you were talking about too. But I think that will be really useful because I think that's a definite way of getting the, even in our actual sense of helping to make catching the degree, the deluge of information, and at least giving some pointers of where to find stuff, because there's stuff. I mean, I still have a folder open from Halloween, our meeting. I still have a Google Drive folder open from here because I don't want to forget it on one of my tabs. And I think having this available will be a nice way to index stuff, and a way that's a little bit easier. And it's not like I have to go write a whole. You could turn each meeting that we have into a full blog article, but is that something that we want to invest in? And, I think this is a good way to do it. And so I think I applaud that.
Yeah, so it'll be easy, I think, it's like a one-stop shop for our things that we've been doing. And then we can go back and look at different resources for them, so we don't have to go say to YouTube or search a Twitter feed. Twitter never really or no third party has really developed a tool for really kind of mining Twitter feeds, other than for the raw data. If you want to find some, it's like Google, you can find things on the web, but if you're going to just search Twitter, it's harder to do, especially when you're looking for something that's related to something else and you don't quite know what it was called, or that's, you might as well forget about it. So
Yeah, I think having things presented in a convenient manner weekly would be helpful to access resources.
Yeah.
Let me see. Okay. Yeah. If you want, because like I have a whole. Did anybody have anything like they wanted like presentations for later today? I know you probably have papers, Bradley, but like was there any other big thing scheduled?
Well, I have I have a thoughts sort of perspective on the developmental AI stuff. So it's
Okay.
not a full presentation, but it's kind of like it's slides.
Okay. I have something else too, so I'll have you go first. I'm trying to figure out the order for some things. So this is a bit of an experimental run.
Okay.
I may give me a new device lobby. Oh, okay. I see. I may just share my screen for some of this stuff here. There we go. Yes, I would like to share this. Oh no, there we go. Okay, so I think I see what you guys are seeing now. So here is here's some of the I've set up. Oh, you can see the whole.
Yeah. Yeah, all the way across.
Let me like fix this here. My screen set up is still a little bit of a work in progress. I'm experimenting using like a large screen TV as a monitor because I needed to get a new one, and computer monitors are so like the technology seems better in TVs than monitors.
Yeah. Yeah, I've used TVs before.
And previously using one of my monitors was like a TV from almost a decade ago, like a flat screen TV from a long time ago. And I was like, oh. So anyway, so yeah, let me walk you through this here. I've done some things with projects overall in our main GitHub oral group repo. I've revised this one a little bit. This is still a work in progress, and this is kind of just like. This is a little nitpicky and lab manager administrative stuff, so it's not something people have to fuss about too much. But I'll say I'll go through this one next. I also made one for the study group in general, and then I made one for the project that I'm gonna do a lot of like actual projects. In a sense, these are not really projects in a sense that how GitHub structures projects is more or less very simple. Like we'll list out all the tasks and move them through, and then you're done. You can have the progress bar, and it's like, okay, great, and then eventually you close the project, and it goes away. It won't be current. This is just where I am. This is pretty much done now. This board isn't updated, but I'm going to be explaining about this a little bit later on. But just to get to this, there's like. I broke this down in some different categories. Hard and fast thing. But like, so kind of dealing with past stuff or what happened this week first. And I kind of put these notes here on top for ideas about how to go with things. Recapping the meeting and mentioning what we did this week. So we kind of did this just now, like last week. I don't know if you can see. There it is. We pretty much did this. Just wanted to note, yes, Brad's NMS presentation was good. I don't even know. I forgot if that was directly linked in the new repo that Bradley set up for that. But those are things that we can do for improvements, or depending how deep in the weeds you want to go there. But yeah, great. So the idea is, okay, we did that. Close the issue. It's gone now. I don't know if anybody did anything for Neuro November submissions. It actually looks like a very cool lower level, like undergraduate. It seems to target undergraduate. But I've been following this stuff, and I know one of the people in our lab Slack. I forgot his name. think it was like Market or something.
Yeah.
I don't quite remember, but I know he mentioned it, and I just wanted to say, I really like what they're doing. So I didn't participate in that directly, but I've been looking at some of the talks, and it's good. Set up the NeuroMesh front end repo. Yes, I not quite linked here, but we do have that set up in the sense of it is here. Whoops! This is set up here, and we're actually going to be fleshing out the NeuroMesh Academy complexity project. Will kind of be linked over here. Like there's links to the past stuff, but this is just sort of just kind of show that and mention to people who have done it before. It's set up. It will continue to be developed there. Transferring the cog study repo. This is kind of what started a lot of the things that I did this week, because it was sort of okay. One of my things for this week, as you'll kind of see later on, is I wanted to just do. I wanted to really organize what I'm doing with the cog study stuff. Cog study model. Maybe I should actually say cog survey cog model is sort of what I'm calling the project. But like, I transferred a bunch of repos around during this past week and last weekend and the early part of this week to try to organize stuff, and I moved actually a lot of things into the lab. So like I have like some new repos here are this one, which is still down here because it was updated before this group was actually made. Like the general condition study group and everything is here, and there's been, I think, here's the survey cog model, which is like housing this specific project, and a lot of the issues and things that are in here, or some of the other past things in that group. So that's here, and that's been moved. A lot of things are moving down. I also updated the Condition Futures website a little bit, and kind of been moving to breaking down some of the projects, because as we'll see, a lot of my things in the Condition Futures group and Frontier Map have been, there's sort of a big umbrella project. There's a lot of, a lot of stuff. And so breaking them down into some more specific projects will be good. And I've been breaking it down. Like I've been revising the proposal, and kind of breaking it down into more concrete projects. Here's kind of a look at the proposal. We'll talk more about this later, so I'm not going to go into it now. But just this kind of setting the bounds for what I want to do, which is sort of the name of the game in the whole Frontier Maps issue, or umbrella. The whole Frontier Maps mega project is about creating bounds of frameworks. Anson, I might mute you because I'm getting a lot of like feedback, bumpy noise and stuff. So.
I'm muted already.
Are you?
I was.
Yeah. Oh no. Anyway, let me see. So that's that. Yeah, a little more of that to come. Oh, I didn't show the website. Let me show you just to kind of see. The main website. I think people have already seen this, but just to kind of, I've transitioned this to the GitHub website, put her name here. This picture is new because I've actually been working on it. There should be an updated link here to the presentation that I'm going to give later. But it's coming along, it's moving. And I'm going through these really fast just because I'm not trying to take up a lot of time here. It's more just to show what we have going on. Also, I made this. For a long time, we've been trying to keep track of our events, and I just wanted a simple way to keep track of it. A very simple spreadsheet. It doesn't look pretty, but here it is, basically. If it loads, yeah. And it's basically a spreadsheet that's somewhat automated. I have a view where it arranges things in chronological order. And I have an automation process, which I'll go into some other time, that it scrapes automatically the title and the URL and the info or the excerpt part of it. So here, like, if you have new stuff, enter it here. You can enter the date, name, whatever. And I don't know if we're going to do these things or not. This is like way down deep in the weeds, but just to kind of keep track of what we've done. This is very incomplete, but this is an idea of what we could use it for. I'm not even putting them on this sort of like front page. But yeah, like here's nerve stuff. This is something that Bradly mentioned. I don't know if he was going to talk more about that. One of the things this week. This was a really cool conference that I didn't really get to attend. Object animation memory. So this isn't like excuse me. This isn't stuff that we've necessarily all gone to entirely, although a number of us has of Neuromatch. These things we've all been to. And I've been to some of them. But just to keep track of events that are upcoming, because there's so many different things and so many different fields to keep track of. So that's where that comes from. And it's here and it's available. I don't know if I've put it. I'll link it to something public or in the GitHub soon. I'll put it for the moment. I'll put it in our chat here. But just to have this quickly and to mention it, we do have a collection. I've been doing this previously in Notion and in other ways of tracking stuff, but it wasn't very accessible. And I really like the concepts of Notion, and I do kind of let you use Notion databases as web pages, and that's a great idea. It's just functionally how they use the links is really a pain in the butt to work with, like external links. I don't really like it. So for the time being, I've switched to this, and it's just a very quick way to do it, and it'll just be there. We can look back on it and integrate it in other things as necessary. So yeah, that's done great. So this is kind of stuff that we've all been doing this week. I think Bradly also, shout out to Bradly for basically writing and finishing up the blog post. We can talk about that in a moment. I also wanted to say just quickly, are we actively, I know these tickets were from before. Is there anything, like I think there's something maybe to do with this, that visiting the daily organization in general. But I think we might have this repost set. Is that set, Bradley?
Well, we have a GitHub organization for synthetic daisies. Actually, I haven't been keeping it up, but if you go, let me share my screen. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can do it like that. Okay.
It's right. There is one of those that I thought should.
I'm going to see if I can actually review it though here. Let's go to this. I don't know if I have it. Oh, actually, it's probably on this one. So from the legacy repo, there's this organization here to the left. And this is the GitHub organization for synthetic daisies. Let me put it into the chat so people can get to it here. All right. And this is, it's not well managed. I've used it for sort of taking some of the better posts and posting it to a new site. So it's like I have the main blog right now on blog spot, which is not great for just presentation wise, but it's a legacy location. So I've posted there for like 10 years or more now.
It's like very like some serious work has been put into this over the course of years. So yeah. Well, I decided to create one blog and stick with it. So yeah, just so that everything is in one place. So this is the repo, and it has like different things. Like there's some series that I've done, like evolution blogging, for example, and something that was star stuff. It was like
where I was reviewing episodes of Cosmos season 2, and like there were a bunch of posts on the blog about that with some supplemental readings and some thoughts about it. And then this is Daisy World. This is actually what the blog is named after. So this is a link to the Daisy World model. We have a Daisy World model in Python. People can download a NetLogo version, and also you can implement Daisy World in an IPython notebook. Then there's this. This is the place where. This is another one. Historical contingencies at the birthday party. This is like a sort of a quick data analysis from a post from 2014. But if you go to this site here, Synthetic Daisies GitHub IO, this is sort of a summary version of the blog. And this is it has like compilations. It has featured posts on the left here, and then it has some categories. So it's almost like a meta blog, where I've taken like the top things from the blog that on Blogspot, and I've kind of looked at the analytics and said which ones are the highest performing posts. I'll put those over here. I'll also have things in different topical areas. So there's been a lot of stuff on DevoWorm. There's been stuff on models, philosophy of science, and representationism. I've had some things on, the evolution collection is here. So these are a lot of the evolution posts. And then cybernetics posts. Yeah. And so this is like a sort of a meta blog. And I haven't really been updating it too often, but it's there. And so we could make use of this as well. If you go to this GitHub IO repository, it's all kind of in here. So it can be run from there. And then that's all that organization. So I don't know if that's something we want to continue on with, updating, like, because we have the blog at Blogspot, the meta blog in GitHub IO, and then I've just sort of used it for this organization. I've used it in our meetings and that, because it's like that one blog that I've kind of stuck with, and it's a nice place to have, like, it's never good to have like a bunch of blogs all over the place. You don't know where anything is, and it's easy to have it like under one banner. So I mean, I've had a couple posts where I've had like guest bloggers and blogs from like published at other places, and I've sort of made copies, reblogged it at Synthetic Daisies, and so I'd be open to, if people want to write a guest post, they can certainly do that. If they want to do like if we want to do something, we've done like group posts before with different people, so.
Okay. Then I think in terms of like those specific issues, I'm guessing there doesn't need to be a created repo for Synthetic Daisies anymore. I think that's kind of done. Is that the case? Because I know we have like different things that are.
I think I suggested renaming it to like Writings or something.
Yeah, and I think that's done now.
Yeah.
Is this thing? Yeah. Okay. So okay, that's cool, and we can. I don't know if you want to like. Did you like want to come back to this again, or was you're talking about it there, revisiting it just to mention it here in the meeting?
Well, I think, yeah, we should probably come back to it. I think we can use the meta blog especially, but I haven't thought about how we might use that specifically. So I'm thinking like if people have ideas of how we might use that more effectively, that would be good. Or if we want to do something like in the meta blog that we don't do in the blog. I don't know how that would work, but I just wanted to give people that schema, to kind of get them, get some ideas out there.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of that. Also, again, the blog. I don't know if I have. Well, I mean, I know you just had synthetic Daises up, but there was the blog.
I've got. I can present it in a bit.
Yeah,
I've got
you
it
can.
up.
So,
Yeah.
thank you for doing that. I like how that looked.
Yeah. So there were a couple issues on the board there. I was going to comment on. Did you?
Oh,
back
oh,
up?
sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay.
Yeah, and then there's kind of probably more back stuff because we haven't cleared out some of the back stuff. So that's why there's a bit of housekeeping that we just did there. But there's all this stuff here that's kind of been active this week. And I don't know any particular order you want to talk about this in, or if what you wanted to say next, Brad?
I see this issue: Frontiers in Artificial Life and Multi-Agent Learning.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about?
I believe that's Anson's project, and I might have put the title wrong, but that's whatever the specific project is called.
That's loosely what it is, yeah.
So just for the projects, like we'll just have like one issue, and then we'll break it down into several issues, or how are you envisioning that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure in that sense of like I kind of have a few things like I have my presentation later here as one of these topics. Like this could basically be a project itself, and this thing here. So that's kind of that setup. But yeah, this is pretty much anything at a task level or project level. I'm not discriminating too much here. But just stuff that's been, in this case, active this week. But I'm not trying to filter too hard for anything like that right now. Anything that's been going on this week in the lab, I kind of want to have a place to talk about that. And like I know, kind of Anson's talked about his stuff already, but there are people, people who aren't here, going around and kind of giving it. I wanted this to be a space where everybody could say, "Hey, what are you doing on?" And between this and sort of the next column, like, what are you doing this week? And do you have any ideas that you're working on fleshing out? Do you need any help with stuff? What would you like to see come out? So anything, you can send those anytime, any day of the week in Slack or here. But I just want to give a specific space to those specific items too. And there's a lot of things happening that we just cleared out some stuff, which is good. Last was a web cafe talk. I don't think there's any particular new updates this week. I know that's coming up very fast. I think it's December, the first or second week in December.
Yeah, December 11.
I think I put the date somewhere. But I'll just put the date there because what was it? Which is a Friday, right?
Yeah, Friday.
And it's like something like 1 p.m. our time or my time, or like
I think it's 11 p.m. your time, or 11 a.m. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we'll have to be. We can talk more about that maybe this upcoming week, but that's been fleshed out. I move that into active review. Doesn't really matter. This one for the Cyber Cafe Scientifique. I didn't put the link here, but I have it somewhere. I forgot what it was called. Here. I think this is it. So here's the submission, I guess. I don't know if you wanted to talk anything about that.
Oh, good. We have the pictures up. Good.
My picture's old, and I updated it, but I don't know. It's okay.
Can you put that in the chat, that link?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's...
but I guess you set up for them. It's like a submission process.
Yeah. So I guess they've already put it up on the thing. I don't know. It's been submitted, but I didn't see this stub. That's why I'm asking about the link. But that's good that it actually came up. So this is, I guess, and I haven't gotten anything back on this, but this is like a, I guess we run it, or they have like a moderator who can join us. And then I put the application in. I just wrote it up and put it in. And I haven't gotten any word back on when exactly it'll be, but it should be coming up. And so the vision for this is just like a recap of what's going on in this group, or, you know, what's going on in orthogonal research, how it's organized, how it's, you know, what we're kind of doing. You know, it's sort of unique. And that's the thing we want to stress. And I guess it's just like a mix of like discussion and slides and things like that. So it's not too, I don't think there's anything really special, but we, you know, and they're going to record it. So it'll be like a video session that people will be able to see later.
Yeah, it seemed like an interesting sort of a lab tour, and how are we approaching distributed collaborative science and engaging. And I actually think it's really timely. I don't think we're going to mention about the pandemic in the description, but like, you know, a lot of people are, I know when you started off, when the pandemic started, you were like, oh, I've been, like, you had a Twitter, something like, oh, I've been working remotely for like a long time. You know, like, it's nothing new for what we're doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. I'm very fortunate, honestly, to have consistent engagement in a lab, and just intellectually and academically. A lot of my friends, they haven't been able to do anything, so I'm happy for that reason, and I look forward to the talk as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can hit some of those issues or points. I think we'll probably go through like a, you know, we'll go through we'll put some slides together, maybe hit some more sort of pointed issues, like, you know, instead of like having this, like, you know, 35,000 foot view of everything, just kind of like drill down into like we're involved with Neuromatch because their, you know, their whole mission was, you know, as an alternative to what was canceled during the pandemic. Or, you know, our structure is robust to something like a pandemic because we're run online and we don't have this overhead of a university structure or like some departmental structure where we would not be able to do certain things, so people can come on board and do things, and, you know, on their own time frame. And, you know, it's stuff like that. So we just want to kind of, you know, give good concrete examples of things. And the point would be to, like, you know, get people excited about it, maybe recruit people, maybe, you know, they can start if they want to start their own thing, they can. But, you know, this is sort of like a template for them. I already wrote a paper on it. I know people have seen it maybe. It's on the Meta Archive. And it's, you know, basically a summarization of this. With some data from some of the other organizations, like from the Open Room organization, showing the sort of general effectiveness of this type of this type of structure, you know, where you have a distributed group working on problems. So it's, you know, we can cite that as well in the talk, but I think it could be a good opportunity to really kind of drill down on some of these issues.
Yeah, I think it'd be good.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving rapidly as we can. Anson mentioned this project. I'm looking forward to that too. The Expect conference blog is in the works. It's not quite there yet. I've taken a whole bunch of notes from it was a 2-day conference, or was it 2 days or 3 days? It was a very short conference with only like 6 speakers or something like that. But what was there was really interesting because they approached predictive processing from a number of different angles, and even like. They approached it from, like, I know I mentioned this to Anson, but like they approached things like chronic disease. They approached infrastructure, even the infrastructure. I think Abby was the Um, I think Abby was the architecture city planning person, and even to see how she talked about affordances, an embodied active inference approach, affordances in the city. Like, these are really cool. To see some of the things we talk about applied in different settings was interesting as well. And of course, there was like, like Sean Gallagher, it's sort of a big name and some stuff, and I actually missed parts of his talk, but there's a lot of stuff there, and I've taken a whole bunch of notes, and I will eventually turn it into something because there's just too much stuff to not make it into something. So, some of my notes are here, but it's nothing quite ready yet. So this is definitely an active but not finished phase of stuff. But that will be coming. This is ready to present. I'll do this later today. So I'll put that there, I guess. And I guess Bradly also wanted to present something about, you wanted to visit developmental AI stuff?
Oh, that's today. That'll be like an update on it, but I don't think it's a whole presentation. So.
And I guess we'll just mention these things and quickly go to like our bigger talks to them.
Yeah.
This is sort of a point of news. I wish I could have gone to one of them, but there's an interesting event series about, I think it's called Corpus Curiosum.
Curiosum, yeah.
Critical Thinking Neuroscience Series 2. I just want to plug this. There's a bunch of events. I didn't get to go to this one, but it looks really good. Next week, new neurons in the adult brain, breaking the dogma, what makes a scientist, and then neuro law. Like, sort of each week they're doing one of these things. And I met one of the organizers I don't know, virtually sort of met at a few events, and I think at the Expect conference. So, like, there's a lot of stuff here that I'm interested in, and I'll try to check these out if I have a chance to do it. So I just wanted to mention that. That's right. Well, reading the note-taking, also mentioning Johan. I don't know how to refer to someone who's an acquaintance and kind of a friend, but mostly just someone that you look up to and you're happy to get to talk to now and then. Dr. Johan John. He's leading a group on category theory, or I don't know if he's leading it, but he probably is. And I was like, is there something I could join about this? And he said they're going through algebra chapter 0. And trying to look at stuff that will lead to category theory. And you can see this here, category theory for programmers. So these would probably be good things to really incorporate into the epistemological directors project, frontier map stuff. And I really didn't have any time to do the reading and get up to par to join the group, but just to kind of mentioning that here, as this is pretty germane to a number of our data and structuring and themes and endeavors within the lab, and that these might be a good place to find some resources about that. So I wanted to mention that here this week, and kind of following up with a note discussion. I had to get my arbitrary Twirlybird reference in, which you kind of already did. And I was actually, I don't know if I said it earlier, but I was thinking in my mind, Bradly, the way of keeping track of things in the Saturday morning NeuroSim week will be a great way to catch the Twirlybirds before they fall to the ground. So there's that. I think that kind of is those things there. I'm not even going to this right now, but if you don't know what demo or die or deploy or die is, check that out. There's a good set of articles online about it. And I just wanted to mention too, like I'm always on the lookout. I know, I think last time Ashad was here, he spoke about one of the apps that he was using, and I know we put it in the Slack, but I forgot what it was. But kind of either it's like a timeline or a visualization between different concepts. Like I'm always on the lookout for software that does that very well, because, well, just because, yes, because I am. So yeah, and also I don't know if you wanted to mention this at all, but I know there was this integration. I think I already have it up here about this.
Yeah, that one I think.
So that looks cool. Did you mention this before? Or?
No, in Slack, not here.
Okay. It looks like a really interesting way to basically push tweets from GitHub. And I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that or talk about it later, because I know we don't have to spend a bunch of time on this right now.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it later. I haven't really looked into it too much.
Okay. Okay, well, that said, if you would like to talk about your things you wanted to say,
yeah. Yeah, one comment about that spreadsheet that you had on for the different conferences.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we have conversations in Slack, and so it depends on the conference. It'd be nice to be able to put some of those conversations, and I know you can link, like if someone makes a Slack post, that you can make a link to that Slack, even if it's like a private link, just to make note of it for the conference, or if there's a way to put that in. So like, if I'm looking for this conference and, oh yeah, we talked about it in Slack, maybe we have like at least one conversation, or I don't know if you can search for something and then put that link, like use the term in Slack and then find a bunch of things and then take the link for that. I don't know how that works, but that might be a way to put that in. I'm gonna
make a note of that here. Yeah. Idea. And that's true. I forgot you can make links to specific Slack. Yes. So yes, I will make a note of that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
I'm just trying to keep everything like from going into the ephemera. That's our goal here.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, this is good though. Good conversations to have. Now we're gonna. Anson, did you have anything to talk about before we move on, or?
Not in particular. I think I'll definitely dig around GitHub and see what you guys have talked about and how I fit into it more. But I think it looks good. It looks like it's a good way of laying out resources in a way where people can opt in and see what's available and who's working on what.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let me go through some things here. So the first thing I think I want to talk about here is the blog posts that I put together for NeuroMatch. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the synthetic Daises post from November 18th. So it was like Wednesday when I made it go live, and I've put this on put a link on Twitter and everything. So this is NeuroMatch 3. This is kind of like, some links. Because there's a NeuroMatch tag on the blog. So I've talked about NeuroMatch 1 and 2. So, if you go to the blog and you search NeuroMatch, you'll find a bunch of posts from NeuroMatch 1 and NeuroMatch 2. So this is a common theme on the blog. And we might even put a feature on the meta blog for NeuroMatch. But so we have this mentioning the hundreds of presentations archived on YouTube, and I haven't checked to see if any of our talks are on YouTube yet. I know they've been putting them up sort of piecemeal, going through the streams that they have. But when those videos are up, we'll put them in the post here. This version of NeuroMatch took the place of the SFN conference. This is an improvement on a legacy conference. And so then I just mentioned that for me, I was involved, I think, in well, I mean, the groups I'm involved with were involved in 5 presentations. So the first one is this contrast between biological and artificial neural networks. A little bit of recap of this, a couple sentences. Give a link to the presentation. The second one was the developmental AI talk, and then talking a little bit about it. Not giving a huge amount of stuff in here, because the trick about writing effective blog posts is you don't want to put too much text up. You don't want to put walls of text up in the body of the blog post. You want to give a really short recap and then put links in, or you can have like an appendix that has more detail. But it's like, if I read it, if you've ever gone to like Medium, you know that they have like a summary at the top. It says like a 5-minute read, and like that's the sort of the culture of blogging. It's like a quick read. So so that's a little bit of description of the talk here. Again, there's a link to the talk if you want to see it. Then the psychophysics of non-neuronal cognition. This is just a short cell here. And then I put in cognition futures. I didn't, there's no presentation for that, but I put this thing in just to tell people that, this project exists and is being worked on. And then this is the talk that I gave with Akshara on lens accommodation and convergence insufficiency. And so there's the, I don't know if this is, I think this is the slideshow. And then, if when we get the videos, then we'll put that in as well. And this is kind of a sort of a description. And then here I mention Rishabh's talk, Seeing Through the Mind's Eye. And then if you're interested in these topics, I'm inviting people to the groups to, if they want to be members. And so this is, I don't know, I mean, like, the drawback of using Blogspot is that it's an older platform. They've tried to update it, but it's, you can download it as a PDF or print it. You can share it, but they don't have like a lot of really super modern ways of interacting with the article. But, that's something that I thought about, and I've stuck with blog posts precisely because I don't want to move everything around. I just want to have a URL, and then that's why I kind of came up with the meta blog, so that we'd have a place to put things in groups and so forth. So that's the blog post. And if you have any things you want to comment on it, or things you want to change, I mean, we can do another blog post on it. If we have like something to add about a specific topic, for example, we can go in and do a blog post like just on one of these, like any one of these talks. And so that's something we can do as well. And then we'd link back to this. So I think the tags here, yeah, these are the labels. Actually, I don't think I have a NeuroMatch label, but I do have like some of these conferences. You'll find NeuroMatch amongst other things. And so they're just, there are ways we can label these. I'm probably going to go back and make a NeuroMatch label now that I think about it. But so that's the blog post. And then we have, I don't think I'm going to get into the papers too much. I have some interesting things here. I have one thing that I will share, though. This is something I'm working on for my job. I'm the community manager of Rockwire Community, which is a group at the University of Illinois, and they're opening up their project in an open source way, and so I'm generating a lot of content, a lot of tutorials for people. And I started experimenting with these GitHub team like sort of streams, like I guess they're the teams where people usually put content for their team. They kind of have a chat, and I've been experimenting with putting in like a feed where you have like all the things, the content that's generated that might guide you in a certain direction for that community. So like I have a blog that I work on through that job, and I post a lot of things on open communities, open source communities. And, you know, I also have a Twitter feed and a bunch of other things. So I've created this sort of thread, or this, I guess it would be like a feed of posts here that kind of guide people to different resources. And then you can pin them. So it's just kind of like Twitter or like Slack. But the only problem is I found out this is private to members of your team. So you can't make this public. But I think it's, if you're a member of this Rockwire GitHub organization, then you can actually access this. So this might be a good template to use for orthogonal lab, for things that maybe we want to keep within our group, but we want to make it sort of open. We don't want to keep it in Slack, because Slack is sort of closed in two ways. It's closed to people who are invited, and then it's like you have to be in that channel. So this would be something we could put in our teams. So like we have like 7 or 8 teams on our orthogonal research GitHub organization. We can actually maybe create streams like this for certain things. You know, share it like we might share like Twitter content. I mean, it's just a thought. I don't really know how it would all work out. Let's see. Actually, I don't think I'll do that one. I think I'll probably just get into the talk now. Or it's not really a talk. It's these thoughts I've had on developmental AI. And I encourage us to do this on a regular basis, because we have we kind of hit a lot of things every week. And we have, like, you know, all these things, and then we kind of let them disappear, or we don't talk about them for a long time. So if you have like thoughts on something, if there's like a talk you saw here or somewhere else, and it's just it can be very loose. It doesn't have to really even make sense that much. But it, you know, I recommend doing this, putting together some slides, maybe things that you've done in the past, linking them to things in the future. So, I mean, maybe there's a more effective way to do it than PowerPoint, but I'm going to go through these. So these are my thoughts on developmental AI. So we had the talk at NeuroMatch, and we had the paper at Baby Minds, which was rejected, you know, largely because it wasn't a good fit. But we did have some issues with, like, you know, is it a formal algorithm? What is it? You know, so those are things that people think about when they read the paper that, you know, you might want to consider for future development. So the first thing is that I don't know if I think I talked about this paper in the DevoWare meeting, but so there's this paper by Denis Jabaudon. He's a French developmental neuroscientist, and he has this paper, Fate and Freedom in Developing Neocortical Circuits. So it's a good paper. It's more, you know, hardcore neurobiology, but he basically covers a lot of stuff about development and what's going on. And he has a quote in the abstract. During development, these circuits emerge from dynamic interactions between cell-intrinsic, genetically determined programs and input activity-dependent signals, which together shape these circuits into adulthood. And so this image at the top this is the mammalian brain, and these are what they call cortical columns. And so in human development, you have the neocortex, and it has like 6 layers of cells, and we think of it as like a sheet of a certain size, but you also have these columns, which are like, you know, a certain patch of cells, but then it goes down 6 layers, and so you can see these layers form in development, and this is what this diagram is. So you start off with sort of the basal part of the column, and then things migrate upward, and they form this set of layers where things are connected not only across like this, which is what we typically think about on a neural network, but up and down like this. And I don't know if you've heard of Numenta or some of the work that they've been doing, but they have this is the model that they use for computation, these cortical columns. And so they're using a little bit different way of thinking about neural communication for processing. And so it's a different way of thinking, but I just thought that was an interesting point. In terms of making things more developmental, one of the other things, though, too, is that if we go back to our, the shorthand was like the baby minds paper, but it's this paper. We're kind of proposing two different things. And this is, oh, hello?
Hi. Sorry. This is a noise in the background.
Oh, okay. I thought it was someone coming in. So this the way we've thought about this is to have two different, like, development broken down into two different parts. There's morphogenesis and developmental freedom, which is where the brain network has already formed and is now just sort of reshaping itself. So it's like you have this morphogenesis and then plasticity. And we've had these two different algorithms that were developed sort of separately, but have kind of linked them together here. An evolutionary algorithm and a Hebbian algorithm. So you have two different phases of development. And going back to the talk at Neuromatch, we know that, we kind of showed this in the, well, this is a little bit off, but we kind of showed this in the slide. This is developmental learning, this is morphogenesis. So there's this period of morphogenesis where there's growth in the number of neurons in the network. And then there's this critical period where there's rapid expansion of that. And then there's developmental learning where the network is fixed, but the connections are malleable. And that's this developmental freedom, or the ability to learn on a stable network. So we have, so I don't have a picture of that yet, but keep this in mind where we're talking about where are we here? Okay, keep this in mind when we're talking about these two phases of development. Okay, so actually what we have now is we can kind of synthesize this into a developmental algorithm where there are three phases of behavior. You have this morphogenesis with an evolutionary algorithm underlying it. You have this critical period where there's this evolutionary algorithm which is sort of sped up and it's producing a lot of variation quickly. And then there's this developmental freedom phase where you have the Hebbian algorithm, but the topology is fixed. Another thing that the other paper that we submitted to the workshops at NeurIPS, and a lot of people weren't on that paper. A couple of people were here. But one of the tools that we mentioned in here are these genotype to phenotype mappings. And so the way that this is envisioned in this paper is a little bit different than the way that people use them in the existing literature. So they have the genotype to phenotype mappings in the literature in genetic algorithm, in evolutionary computation, in that area of research, where it's a sort of a theoretical mapping between protein and gene expression, cells, and like a phenotype. In this case, it would be cognitive processes. And so you have this buildup of complexity. And people have talked about this in biology. They call it the vertical perspective, where you have, you go from genes to behavior, and there's this like set of levels where, things become, manifest. So your protein and gene expression, leads to cells and synapses. They build cells, they build synapses, they build cell communities. But then all of that contributes to like organs and, different hormones being secreted and all this. And then that leads to some phenotype. And this is cognitive processes. So we have this sort of very stylized model here where we have these different layers that contribute to the next higher layer. And then we have this little agent at the top. And this is the body, or the embodied part of this agent. And so this is where the sensors and the effectors reside, so it interacts with the environment. You have a specific position and spatial location of this thing, and an orientation to the stimulus. So it's, you have this sort of this dual process model. You have this embodied agent on top of this biological agent, which is just basically a bunch of layers of different things going on that you would find in an organism. And so Why would we want to model those separately? Because they're kind of different sets of processes. One set of processes involves sort of interacting with the environment, and then another one involves interacting with sort of in the biological world. But they have an effect on one another. So that, it's unclear, even I think to our current state of science, what those relationships are. But we do have, that's the way we're thinking. We're thinking in terms of in the direction of integrating those. So again, you have this transcriptional control, which is it consists of endogenous, which means like internal regulatory mechanisms, and then environmental components. So you have, transcriptional control can be affected by the environment. This is where a gene is expressed and gives rise to a protein, and then that gives rise to some sort of tissue. There are endogenous things, like there's stochastic mechanisms. So like in circadian clocks, there's often this temporal regulation that's very tightly controlled, but sometimes you also have stochastic expression of things. So sometimes they're just expressed as much as possible at random intervals, and then that works as well. And so there are all sorts of endogenous control mechanisms. But then also gene expression can be modulated by the environment. And so we know that, for example, if you're, if a animal is eating a certain diet or deprived of nutrients, that can affect gene expression. Daylight, a photo period can also affect gene expression. And of course, different environmental agents like radioactivity can also affect gene expression. So there are a lot of things that we, encounter in the environment and in embodied context that can, affect gene expression. And we don't know exactly how gene expression affects sort of cognition, but we know it affects the sort of morphogenetic aspect of things. So this is our agent, and this is something we talk about in the paper, experience dependence. And this is, this is kind of something that we need to work on more, I think, especially with respect to the connectivity matrix. So the way these developmental Bradenberg vehicles are kind of sort of spelled out up to this point is that you have a couple of effectors here, or actually a couple of sensors here on the front. And they don't have to be on the front. They could be on the sides or in the back. And they take in information from the environment. And so this can be both just kind of general information like the presence or absence of light, or it can be like the light is coming in at a certain angle. So it's sort of like a receptor in neuroscientific terms. Like, you could think of this as a receptor, like a photoreceptor in the eye. And so we know that in the eye, photoreceptors may be tuned to a certain type of stimulus. So if there's a stimulus coming from the front, this photoreceptor might be tuned to that much more than light coming from the side. And so your eye has photoreceptors tuned to all different frequencies or different orientations of stimuli. And so each one of these sensors can have a different sort of preference for input or not. So that's your sensors. And then inside we have this network, and that's this WIJ, which is basically this connectivity matrix within the agent. And this is where, our morphogenetic component of development comes into play, because, initially you're going to have maybe one node. And these are called interneurons because they're in between a sensor and an effector. And so you might only have one node, which is one interneuron to start with. And all these sensors might connect to it. And then this might have connections to both wheels. And so at a very early stage of development, all of your sensors are going to one interneuron, and they're distributing to all effectors. So there's not much control there other than just having a basic communication channel. There's a lot of crosstalk. And then, that's where you're getting your sort of morphogenesis, which is specified sort of specified by the genome. So the morphogenesis period isn't affected by environment. It's just that there's there are these neurons that pop up, and you get these connections that occur, and then there's some selection on this network to sort of optimize information processing, and that's where this comes in. So imagine you have the single interneuron where all the sensors are connected, and then it distributes to all the effectors. Now, you're going to have no real control over anything, but you also have a lot of crosstalk. So all these, all these sensors are putting their information into a single node, and the node doesn't know how to process that. So it just kind of passes on random stuff to the effectors, and the control isn't great. But as soon as you start getting these new nodes coming into the network, and this is through this genetic program, this morphogenesis process, then you start to get options for routing information. You can get different, sensors that maybe have a certain orientation to light or to sound, and they, take one path, and then more general sensors might take another path. They might be integrated at the same interneuron, but now there's a structure for the information, and it gets passed on to the effectors. And so then you end up with a network like this where there's not full connectivity, but there's you can basically take this network and threshold the connections above sort of like random noise, and get something like this where there's some structure to the input versus the output. And so this is this sort of innateness. So we're kind of building from this innateness where you start off with one neuron, you start producing other neurons, and there's natural selection going on within this developmental process. Basically, what are the needs of the network? This is all very fuzzy at this point, but this is something we need to think about more. How does this work? How does this genetic algorithm produce this network? And then how does it end up, in the critical period? Then there's a lot of growth. What determines that critical period? But those are things we need to think about more, that are all very fuzzy at this point. But I think a lot of the simulations that we've created up to this point really kind of are pieces to this puzzle. So the genetic algorithms that we've developed for this, sort of talk about how this network expands, and then how it's maybe selected for certain things. But it doesn't really talk about, when you get a new network node, is that something that, what are the selection criteria? Maybe they're different. Different parts of the network have different selection criteria. We don't really know that. So this again is this innateness. So using this innateness criterion, we can build not only these flat networks, but we can build these sort of topologically sophisticated networks as well. So we can have cells that divide, cells that form a ring, cells that form this sort of nondescript network structure. We can do all these things, and then during developmental freedom, where this network is fixed, we can have experience-dependent plasticity, where these connections between the nodes are then, that's when the weights are kind of figured out. So, you have this initial phase where these cells appear, they start to get connections between them, you start to get some specialization. In the critical period, things are going more rapidly, so you get this ability to get great change. And then when you have this developmental freedom, your topology is fixed, but then the connections can vary based on the experience of the environment. So if the sun is traveling across the sky and the agent is tracking it, when you're adding neurons, you're actually maybe adding specialization to the network, like different modules kind of form in response to this stimulus. But during sort of this experience-dependent plasticity, you have, you can adjust the weight. So it's like fine-tuning with respect to the stimulus. So this reminds me of something that I mentioned, I think, in the allostasis machines talk, This is where we build a developmental perceptron. This is even a more toy model than the Bradenberg vehicles, where we just have a 3-layered perceptron. And what we're doing here is we're increasing both the number of input cells at each layer and the number of connections between each layer. So we're kind of varying these number of nodes, these number of connections, and we're seeing what happens with learning. So so we have this Wij, which turns into some sort of output function. And so, you grow the network in terms of its size. I didn't show the change in size here, but so we can use that sort of to calibrate this process. And so one of the things I mentioned at the end of the NeuroMatch talk was this idea of contingency in development. And so this is where we have a one-dimensional developmental possibility space. Basically, the way you read this diagram is you start at the top with a single state. And at this point, there are a lot of different possible options we can have. So everything is very fresh and everything is very possible. And then as we travel down this tree and reach different states at later points in time, that restricts what we can actually achieve. Because once you travel down one of these paths, that locks you in developmentally. You can no longer go to that point. And so the way I think about this is this is where at the beginning of morphogenesis, and then these later nodes are at later stages of morphogenesis, where you have this network that's forming, and you have the fitness criterion for things that are more fit or less fit. So it's kind of locking you in, although there are things that are still being built. And then this critical period is where this process intensifies. And then you get this period of stasis where you get developmental freedom, where you can actually still have options to reach in development. But at some point you run out of options and you're kind of locked in to a certain small subset of options. But you've gone through this, you have all these contingencies that led you to that point. So, that's the way we have to think about development. It's very flexible, but the flexibility is reduced over time. So the last point I'll make here on this is that I wanted to point out this is more of a metaphoric observation here. We've talked about epigenetic landscapes in this group, and I almost forgot that I never really showed a picture of these things to people. So this is an example of an epigenetic landscape. And so this is a tool that they've used in developmental biology for probably 100 years, where it's very the image on the left is something that was created by Waddington. And this is, something out of the 40s and 50s. So there's no computation really here. It's just all sort of a drawing. But the idea here is that you have this, what they call a developmental landscape. And you can see here it's like a landscape with hills and valleys. And the valleys are these channels where things tend to fall. So this tree that I showed you back here, these are channels on a developmental landscape. You can think of this whole space across this way and up through time as a landscape. And then these are your channels to your possibilities. And so you have this landscape where it's rugged or it's relatively smooth. And so that gives you more a larger number of fewer channels. And it's just like a landscape with rivers on it, where the rivers cut through and they erode onto the landscape and they form these channels. So they form channels, but those channels form a tree that then we can go from like an initial state and then to daughter states, and then you end up with these different terminal states. And so in this image, this is the developmental landscape. These lines at the top are the influences of environment, and the lines at the bottom are these gene networks. So these boxes down here are genes, and then the lines coming up are the interactions between genes. And so that's the sort of the Waddington conception of development as influence of environment, influence of genes, and they converge on this developmental landscape. At the right is an image of different cell types in a developmental landscape. And so these are actually stem cells and some differentiated cells. So these are stem cells, these are neural cells, these are trophoblasts. So these are all different cell types. They all come from the stem cell population here. Actually, this is induced stem cells. So these are actually derived from stem cells somewhere in here. And they're all kind of like differentiating in different ways. And so those are developmental landscapes. The other point I wanted to make for people who are interested more in the machine learning aspect of this, and we're talking about an algorithm, so we have to think algorithmically, is that there's this connection, and I don't know what it is, I'm not proposing anything here, between these landscapes and a gradient descent model. So in this, on the left here, we have developmental canalization. We have this initial state here at the top, and of course it's stylized as a ball, and these balls roll down the hill, and they go into these channels because that's, you find the path least resistance. These channels then are these stable phenotypic states, and you end up at the bottom in these wells where these are attractors of mature cell types. So the cell is undifferentiated here, and there are a bunch of differentiation events, and you end up in these attractor basins over time that give you these finished products, if you will. And so there's plasticity once it's in these attractor points, but the plasticity is restricted. You can't just jump from, say, this attractor over to this attractor. See, you can't go from like a bone cell to like a neuron easily. I mean, you actually can if you, intervene with like, if you're reprogramming cells. But in nature, you wouldn't necessarily see that. And so that's the way we think about like development and developmental trajectories. Now we think about a gradient descent model, we think of something like this, where we have this landscape of an energy landscape, I guess, which is non-convex. So the learning function is nonlinear, and it has this sort of rugged shape, and you're trying to minimize your loss or your energy. And so you're minimizing in this landscape. You can also maximize if that's what you're into, but most people, there's this minimizing imperative. And so that's why, we measure things like loss, we measure things like learning rate. Those things are all sort of minimized or maximized accordingly. And so there's some connection here between these two things. And I think if you're going to talk about a developmental algorithm, we ultimately have to go from maybe something like this to something like this. And we have to make the connection between these two things. And I don't know what that connection is. It's probably in maybe the benchmark measures that we would use for some sort of developmental algorithm. In other words, you might have this process of contingency where things are, gradually becoming more fixed in the network. And that might lead you to minimize your error in learning, right? So your agent is learning things, but it's really imperfect. And then as the network, shapes up and gets fixed at some point, you get a lot of possibility for learning things that maybe you're not measuring, like associations or something. But if you're trying to get it to learn some certain set of patterns and getting it to do it correctly, then you're actually minimizing your error over time. I think that's, again, this is just a very broad idea that I have. I just thought we should consider it. And that's all I have for that. Any questions or comments about that?
No, it was very useful to think about and to see them together that way. I had some different ideas about I think it would be interesting to think about this across. In these instances, it's interesting because it's sort of like we're looking at one model, but also like a major influence on the innates and how the precepts are structured, like generational, like different generations of it too. But I feel like that's a maybe different, slightly different take on it. And then the last part, specifically, when you're talking about I really like the gradient descent versus the epigenetic landscape, and that diagram is very helpful at the end to kind of compare the two images, but also like what's going on. And I had a thought about when you're saying how to connect it to developmental algorithms, I thought the word threshold came up to mind because like there's certain triggers, and I've only really ever done a very limited amount of lab work in my experience, but the lab work that I did was on developmental, like the circadian rhythm and how that was affected by other structures in young mice as they were developing or not affected. And I feel like it's really interesting to think about all of this in terms of, whether it's a timing threshold or, a certain, what are the different sort of demarcations of development in that sense? As something that, we mentioned that we've got the critical periods, and I think that's sort of this is a nice presentation of saying a movement towards sort of a coherent framework of, okay, how do we divide these things out into pre-critical period, relative. You establish the channels of development, and then in that channel you have some plasticity relative to the establishment of the channel. And I think that works. And so I'll leave it at that. But this is definitely helps. I think this has definitely put a conceptual step forward, and one that helps identify what we need to work on.
Long term, this is definitely something I want to learn more about. I think I'm not sure how much this is in the domain of the lab, but personally, I would find this interesting for like systematically analyzing the physical origins of niche differentiations like prey-predator relationships, and also like gender dimorphisms, gender and sex dimorphisms, and both the physiological structures that allow for it, and the way that relates to, like, I don't know, complex interspecies systems on a broader scale. Like the whole time I was just thinking primarily about like physically like I don't know much about it, but I was thinking mostly about like how most mammalian fetuses look not identical but almost the same, and it's interesting how you can like visually you can very easily visually apply this, well, maybe not apply, but like relate this system to concrete developmental divergences. Like,
Yeah,
at a certain point, like you at first, so this little rat-looking thing with 4 nubs, and then those nubs get certain shapes that force certain things, and if there's something that's a little off, you get a 6-finger. So I think it's interesting to relate to a lot of different ideas, and I would be interested when I honestly don't understand gradient descent. Like I had a lecture about it in one class, but I think it's definitely something that I want to learn more about, and there seems to be a lot of interesting applications. And I think that the way that you're approaching it seems very systems dichotomy, trying to create a dichotomy, and this is a word I missed, but organizational way of would allow for systematic analysis, and that's something that particularly interests me. So I think it's very interesting.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I think it's definitely food for thought. I didn't want to like get into really formal, anything really formal here. I just wanted people to get a sense of what maybe next steps for this sort of line of work. So the part about like growing the morphogenetic part, I didn't mention that like our typical genetic algorithm approach is to build like a population of different networks and then select from those networks. But that's sort of part of it. We're going to have like a population of agents, and you have different. They have different topologies, and then those will be selected. And then, you could have like a tournament selection where, the ones that have like maybe the best performance then go on and go to the next stage of development, which is the static network, but like where you have this plasticity that's operating and shaping the network in terms of specific functions. So like we've talked about, I think we've done some work on spatial cognition where you have them find things in space, which is a task that again, this is something that would be used to calibrate the system to see how they actually perform, because you're generating these networks and they're all different sorts of shapes and sizes, and so maybe some work really well, some don't, and so we want to rule out the ones that don't work well. And in development, that sort of happens when you have like developmentally lethal phenotypes. It's like you might have like an organism with one eye, and like it can't produce any enzymes that it needs to digest food. Well, that's not going to survive in nature, so it's they call developmentally lethal. They just die in development, so they don't get to live at all beyond that. So that's sort of the idea behind sort of selecting on this morphogenetic potential. And then you have the ones that survive then can go on and exhibit this plasticity where we know those networks do something useful. Now, can they learn things really well or not? Or what's, we have to have this,
Is there a term for something that's not developmentally lethal, but also not necessarily, but still self-propagating? Like something that's like mimetically spreads.
You mean like something that's not directly related to immediate survival? Or?
Yeah, if there's something that like a feature that like stays anyways, but isn't directly related to lethality. This
like legacy code.
Well, I think the idea of developmental lethality is just something that just doesn't allow it to live. Like, you have all sorts of combinations of things. Sometimes, like, there will be a combination of things that just won't allow it to survive in the wild. Like, it might be, it doesn't have like a outer skin, and so it's just going to be really susceptible to being, infected. And, I'm thinking of like C. elegans where, they're different developmentally lethal like they have all these defined genotypes, and some of them, if you knock out a gene or something, it just doesn't have like the basic metabolic function that it needs to live. And so it's not, there can be a lot of things though that can be carrier traits that are and they may be useful if you evolve something else. Like if you there might be some trait that's maybe like quite suboptimal, but it isn't really expressed, And then, later on in evolution, there might be some circuit that forms through some intermediate mutations that allows it to do something special, like shed its skin. And then that becomes very fit. And so then that becomes actually quite useful to the organism instead of being potentially lethal. So it's...
Is there a term for that?
Oh, I can't remember. But there... a lot of people write on things like robustness, and they write on...
Robustness in what?
I think just there's a literature on evolutionary robustness that might be useful, that you might find useful. It's the idea that you have this, evolutionary changes happen, and they're not like, it's not a matter of like something, mutation by mutation, whether it's fit or not. It's that sometimes there are mutations that occur that don't get expressed. And then, if they do get expressed, they might be lethal, but if they don't get expressed, they can be, they can stay in the gene pool, and then eventually when there are other things that happen, they can maybe develop resistances to certain things, or it enables them to metabolize new resources or things like that.
So, like, would sickle cell be part of that?
Well, sickle cell is actually related to malaria resistance. So it's so it's a mutation that enables one thing, but there's also a deleterious effect depending on the gene dosage and depending on the sort of Mendelian inheritance of it. So it's
So there's a term for that, but not remember.
I can't remember it either.
I think honestly, I don't want to get too abstract, but I'm interested with what language and complex thought fit into that,
Well, yeah. I mean, I had some thoughts about that this week, but that's.
I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical.
Yeah.
But I think, but I am interested. I guess that's kind of what drove my original question was language, probably even gender, though sex is less so, doesn't really fit into I think evolutionary lethality.
Yeah.
But I'm interested, but it's sort of enabled by features that either incidental, that by chance aren't at least short-term evolutionary lethal. Our ability to tinker and language might destroy, I don't know. I think it's a very indirect, non-technical, concrete pathway, but I'm interested in different ways it can relate to different things. So I was just wondering if there was a term for stuff that isn't necessarily related to evolutionary lethality, but at the same time is enabled by phenotypical expressions that are about evolutionary lethality.
I think that's what makes a lot of things in human social studies and even cognitive, and I'll broadly say the cognitive sciences, because there's a lot of stuff to take away from direct evolutionary stuff, but at the same time, there's the scope of the evolutionary questions is different. Like when you're talking evolutionary for an insect, it's a very binary. It's much closer to a limited dichotomy of is this contributing directly to my immediate fate or not?
From my understanding, maybe affordances would fit, but just a little winding road. Yeah,
and higher level stuff for humans is much more. And again, I won't go into either, but what I thought about earlier speaking, there's this sort of space that human society has created that's really not multi-generational space of thought and concepts and stuff that isn't. It's just very different from a different kind of a different organism that isn't based on these sort of other conceptual layers. And I'm not saying that dismissively, just like the calculus changes at that level. Like the what's going into those things is
Yeah, like multi-gener. I don't. So like, did you? So the term is evolutionary lethality. Is that correct for the genetic algorithm?
Um. Oh. Well, I was referring to in the thoughts section. I was referring to developmental lethality, and that's actually
Oh,
a biological thing that
yeah.
happens. But then there's, then I was talking about implementing it as a genetic algorithm.
Okay.
So there isn't a language for it in the genetic algorithm sense.
I
But
think,
yeah.
I think that's interesting. Like, I think like if you take it. So what? Crap. So what Jesse was saying about crap. I can get this train of thought back. So if you take developmental lethality, I think that it's interesting how it give me one moment. I lost the thought for a moment.
I think you were basically saying like there are instances where things that may not necessarily be lethal may just because I just want to see, and this is more my idea than yours, but like, just because something isn't necessarily immediately lethal doesn't mean it doesn't have not necessarily deleterious effects, but there's a there are other ways that it creates let's say branches or developmental bottlenecks which may or may not be useful or good later on. Even if it doesn't cause death, basically.
Yeah.
Oh no! Where I was going was that I think it's interesting how you can kind of separate out developmental lethality related features from, I don't know, I don't want to say aesthetic, but non lethality constrained features. Like, I think it's interesting how that maps onto like our sensory qualia versus our, I don't know.
Yeah, like what comes to my mind is like when you see a peacock. Like, does the peacock need to have gigantic feathers in the background that are really punchy and bright? Like, probably not. Like, it probably could do a much simpler version of that, which might even be less costly genetically and energy-wise to maintain. These big, giant plumes and feathers and whatever. There's probably a more efficient way to do that. Nevertheless, it's there. Like, something like that.
I was thinking something like that, but I was thinking more like if you take like a if you like there are a lot of problems in general intelligence that have to do with like the fact that like what range of temperatures a human finds comfortable is kind of arbitrary and mostly just happens to relate to the way we evolved and where our stasis is centered. And I think that I'm not sure this entirely works, but I think it's interesting how that might line up with things that are like developmental. I don't know. Is that
Well, yeah. It kind of tries to
trained by developmental lethality, like things that like maybe I don't know if that train of thought works out, but that's where I was headed.
The last thing I would add to that is sort of a comment that I didn't make much earlier was about how you mentioned affordances, and I was thinking affordances. Affordances, as I continue to think about the term, is this sort of messy term that you can apply affordances at so many different levels of the problem. But like, there's affordances that like physically, like as something's physically being developed, the body. As the body comes into place, as the brain structures have developed, there are things that enable it or not. Like there will be, if someone's blind, if someone is an amputee or quadriplegic or something, like there are shifts as those physical things aren't there because what's afforded in physically engaging in the world changes. Like, okay, there's that level of it as well. And there's also sort of like, there's a relationship between the physical body and that kind of affordances that you can just access. Like, yes, and that you can drill down or be more micro or go more macro in that too. And I think some of what Anson was saying about like the other things were sort of like at a there's like a, not dismissively, but like there's like a superficial or more top for human society in human life and stuff. Like, oh yeah, I'm born from the Northeast, so winters don't feel the same as if I was born, in a tropical environment. Like, yes, like there's those relative reference points that happen, and there's like, it's sort of like, is that set by like initial conditions exposed to, during the critical period, during development, during whatever, or there's a normalized, parameters and barometer and sense of, okay, this is my allostatic norm that I need to go back to, kind of thing.
I think that the developmental, I don't know, what would you call the developmental tree of, like, you probably, in the, I don't know, like, I'm just thinking of the diagram you had, the different pathways. I think that'd be an interesting model to think of, like, if human robot interactions from, like, you want the robot to be able to understand, I'm doing air quotes, understand the evolutionary and developmental context for sensory qualia for the person interacting with the robot. And I think it's interesting to think of that, I guess, developmental tree as a possible model for how you could contextualize and describe how homeostatic ranges. Even like think of like temperature, like originally.
I want to say this term that comes to my mind. It's sort of BS, but you kind of get it. Like evolutionarily, empathy of one's evolutionary development, and like the backstory that led to their sense of allostasis and their norms and that stuff.
Like, I'm just thinking of like strict, like, okay, we evolved from lizards who were cold-blooded, who evolved from various other organisms who had specific different temperature ranges, which their metabolic processes work under, and then we evolved to be warm-blooded and have our own different temperature ranges. And I think like that kind of specificity, even if we're just doing like, yeah, that's a very like toy example because it's very easy to put down. Okay, you just want you just program the thermostat to be room temperature because that's what humans like.
Well,
I think that it's interesting to like, for more complex things like emotions or even just like customer service robot, like I think it'd be interesting to apply the idea of developmental tree as constraining positive homeostatic ranges in the related kinds of quality and stimulation we find pleasing or positive. As a possible usage, I'm sure there's more technical, robust, and computational ways to quantify that and relate that to existing literature. But yeah, just where my mind is headed.
Oh. Yeah, that sounds great. This is a great conversation. I don't want to. We could go on all day, I guess, but
yeah. I'm going to say one final thing, if I can, really quickly, just to put it here and come back to it later. One of the questions buried in what Anson said that has come up a lot in many of the things that I've seen in like expect and predictive processing and future AI stuff is, the debate about you have to understand our human intelligence is billions of years old, and we don't want to be starting over. Like, to be realistic, it's like you don't want to start over every time you're making an application, for something or developing something. You have to kind of pick where you start from in evolutionary speak. You're not going to go from life itself. You're not going to go from single cell. You're going to pick a point in that process and go from there, or at least try to relatively create a simulation model later from that point. And I feel like that's a really big arena within which what Anson said fits. And also, I think there are also a lot of assumptions that can be challenged in that arena too, because people might just think, oh, well, I only need this depth, whereas maybe another depth of that is more important, or what are the branches in the tree that people aren't seeing, so to say. So that will just something to put a pin in, as they say.
Yeah. All right, sounds good. I think that's great. I think that there's a theme there of like this tree, so I'll have to make note of that. And then, maybe talking about it more in terms of concretely in terms of robotics. I also maybe in future meeting might want to do a presentation on what they call dual process evolution. So there's this, cultural evolution, which is sort of a hot area or an emerging area where people are thinking about culture from an evolutionary standpoint, and then by extension behavior, but also like how that relates to genetic evolution. And it turns out you can build these dual process models where you have like culture operating, and culture evolves, but it operates according to a different set of rules. So, but we know that like from humans, we have both culture and like a genetic underpinning that evolves. So they both evolve, but they evolve maybe in different ways. And so people have tried to capture that. So I might give a little bit of a talk on that. It's going to be a little bit away from the AI perspective, but maybe we'll bring some examples of it in, and it might be useful. The contextual geometric structures, I have a talk up on YouTube about that. It's the more recent one where I kind of get a little bit into that, actually. So it might be useful, a useful perspective for AI. So other than that, I think that's a great conversation. We might continue it in Slack. But otherwise, have a good week. Both of you are going to be celebrating Thanksgiving this week, so was I. So happy Thanksgiving. If you're doing, I don't recommend going anywhere to meet people, but have a good week, and we'll talk next week.
Yeah, good stuff. I think everybody updated.